Hello, and welcome to Lore Watch, a roundtable freeform discussion about lore and your favorite media. I'm your host, Joe Perez, one of several lore-focused folks, and I've got with me my stupendous co-host, Matt Rossi. How are you doing today, Matt?
I'm feeling very canonical.
Well, normally here's where we'd answer some questions from you, our wonderful listeners, but we're running a little bit light on those, so I'm going to encourage you at this point, as a reminder, to send your questions in on stuff you want us to cover.
Ask us questions. Look how cute I am. You can leave us questions.
You can send those questions into podcast@blizzardwatch.com. We ask that you specify the show that it is for in the subject line, as well as any special pronunciation of your name. You can also hit us up on Discord. We have the Q and Podcast Questions channel open to everybody. And we also have the Q and Podcast Questions channel, which is set aside for our Patreon subscriber, the Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel, aptly named. We tend to look there first as a way of saying thank you for helping us keep the lights on. This one's going to be a little bit of an odd one, probably for some of you, but as we wind down this year, and we're recording this a couple days before Christmas here in the States, and various other holidays surrounding that, sometimes Matt and I get a little nostalgic for some of the weird old days, and I do mean weird and old because we're going to be talking about product tie-ins and weird crossovers in comic, and how they were fascinating approaches to storytelling, as a little bit of a Christmas treat for Matt and myself. And I'm going to kind of toss it over to Matt because we've been literally talking about for a couple of minutes of some weird weird tie-ins that are canonical that still are canonical. And there's one I definitely want to end on, but we'll see if we can get there. So Matt, take it away.
Okay, I don't know how many people know this, but in the late 70s, early 80s, Marvel Comics, one of the two big American comics publishers, began doing weird little tie-ins. The first one of real note was Kiss, the band Kiss. You know them, Gene, Paul, Ace, and Peter. I make them sound like a boy band. And in a way, they kind of were. They wore clown makeup, kinda, but not really. It was more stylized. And they all had personas. Like Gene Simmons was the demon. Ace Frehley was the Starman. I don't remember what Paul was. I know he also had a big star on his face.
Peter Criss was the cat. That's all I remember.
Yeah, Peter Criss was the cat. And they kind of blurred the line between understanding that they weren't really those things and not. And Marvel Comics, for whatever reason, ran with this. First off, they allowed the guys from Kiss to draw their own blood and have it mixed into the ink of the comic. Like, this is a real thing that they did.
Yeah, something that also was repeated later on with we now know there was elder abuse and against his likely his right mind and permission, but they did it with Stan Lee, and other comic creators had done this in the past as well before it was frowned upon by governance and health standards.
And there's one example that's actually heartwarming and not horrible, like the Stan Lee one, which is that editor Mark Gruenwald, when he died, they mixed his ashes into a printing of Squadron Supreme, a comic that he had been writing. And in that case, he was totally on board with that. That was something he wanted, as opposed to the horrifying Stan Lee. Absolutely wasn't. But in addition to the fact that they made this weird comic, the comic itself postulated that Kiss were in fact superheroes. Mm-hmm. In the Marvel Universe. And when I say in the Marvel Universe, I mean they then had their, at the time, biggest villain, Dr. Doom, who is obviously still one of their biggest villains, and Mephisto, another big villain then, big villain now, fight Kiss as part of their origin story. And the story was canon to Marvel Comics. Like, Dr. Doom pointedly side-referenced it. As one of his robots was involved. Like this story was considered and is still considered canon. They then did another one. They did another Kiss comic, and then later on published both of those comics as a single, Kiss comic for people to buy. And it's kind of set the stage for how Marvel approached every other, for lack of a better word, tie-in that they did after that, with greater and lesser emphasis. Some comics they did this with, they didn't really tie them in very much. Others, they tied in so well that the comics outlasted the products they were talking about. I don't know which one to talk about first. I think I know the one Joe wants to talk about last, so I'm going to avoid it right now. But one of the examples of this in the 80s was Marvel UK, which was, for lack of a better word, Marvel's United Kingdom publishing imprint. They had a separate one, partially for tax reasons, and also partially because they had a bunch of English creators that they were interested in seeing what they would do. For example, Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons did. Well, it wasn't Dave Gibbons. Who was it? Oh, Paul. Was it Paul? Oh, bloody heck. I can't remember who the artist was, but they did the Captain Britain comic. And later on, the characters from it would become part of the X-Men, and still are. Psylocke, a.k.a. Betsy Braddock, is Captain Britain's sister. She had mutant powers, as did her brother. The Marvel UK imprint, the characters were all considered to be canon within Marvel Comics. They were just the British ones that you didn't see very often in American comics because they lived in England. But as a result of this, when they got licenses to stuff in the UK, for example, they published several Doctor Who comics, and as a result of this, the X-Men technically met Doctor Who. And at the same time,
technically Unit.
Yes, technically Unit, the British organization created in Doctor Who. It was the British government response to weird alien stuff before Torchwood. And for example, it had the Brigadier, who is a big character in Doctor Who. He was the head of Unit. But as a result of that, not only did that happen, but a character named Death's Head was essentially created in the Doctor Who comic, and eventually became a major character in Marvel. Like, he still shows up to this day because they created him, but his entire backstory is Doctor Who related. And it's just one example of the kind of thing they did. They did the same thing with they had multiple crossovers with G.I. Joe, and G.I. Joe comic that they put out was said to be in the Marvel Universe, even though it was always involving Cobra and not like any of the other world-threatening organizations Marvel existed in. But a big part of this that I personally take near and dear to my heart was the Godzilla tie-in, which took place from, I think, 77 to 79. And this comic, there's the words I would use to describe it. We don't use those words on this podcast. So I'll just say it's bug pirate ghosting.
Yeah.
It's just completely out of its gourd, gloriously so. And it didn't for a second, it put its foot down on the gas. Like, as soon as Toho said, you can do it, go ahead, you can't disrespect Godzilla. And they were like, oh, don't worry. Disrespecting Godzilla is absolutely the last thing on our minds. They put their foot down on the gas pedal, and what we got was 2 years of Godzilla rampaging across the Marvel Universe.
In weird and interesting ways. Like, I'm not just jumping in real quick because, like, one of the things I remember is, like, I remember there being, like, King Ghidorah being, like, showing up after inheriting Galactus's power cosmic. And then
that's the more recent stuff, but it is really cool that they did it.
Yeah, and then you had to have Godzilla show up to, like, help beat him down. Like, they've been doing weird stuff with Godzilla for, like, ages, and
30 years now.
30 years. And it's interesting that a lot of it until recently, it wasn't Avengers. It was mostly X-Men crossover because of the whole radiation mutation thing, I think, was really the angle they were going for.
They did that stuff too. Godzilla basically being a kind of a mutant.
Yeah.
But the 70s books, the reason that they're so fascinating is they started off with a character named Dr. Demonicus, who was basically just trying to make giant monsters to take over the world. And Godzilla kept messing up his plans. Not because Godzilla cared, but because Godzilla was just wandering around. This drew the attention of S.H.I.E.L.D. If you remember the Captain America, the first Avenger movie, Happy Hogan, the guy with the hat. Not Happy Hogan, no.
No, it was it was Dum Dum Duggan.
Dum Duggan.
Dum Dum Duggan. If you watch the Captain America movies, you'll know who Timothy Dum Dum Duggan is.
Yeah, and he was played by Neil McDonough, who is, like, infamous. You'll know him if you see him.
He got put in charge of the Godzilla squad.
Yeah, he was put in charge of the Godzilla squad in a move that felt very much like Nick Fury going, I cannot make myself deal with this, Tim. You got to take it. And him being like, oh, God, no. Dum Dum then basically recruited a Japanese scientist to make a robot to fight Godzilla. And they then got Stark Industries to build the robot. So Tony Stark was then at this point canon in the comic. From here, when the robot failed to stop Godzilla, because literally nothing could stop Godzilla, like even in this book, they got the bright idea to go talk to Hank Pym, who gave them his Pym particles. He gave them essentially shrinking gas.
To shrink Godzilla.
Remember, that's how, yeah, his original powers were he would spray himself in the face with gas and then he would shrink. They used that on Godzilla, and it worked. They shrank him down to the size of like a very small iguana. He was like 3 inches tall. And they figured at 3 inches tall, there's no way this dinosaur could be a threat anymore. We've successfully captured Godzilla. Godzilla had lasted maybe 20 minutes in that cage before he burned the lockout with his, flaming atomic breath, because he didn't lose it. He just got smaller. And escaped the helicarrier with the help of a child who loved him, because, it's Japanese giant monsters. There's always some kid that loves them. The kid who was the grandson of the guy who made the Godzilla killing robot was in love with Godzilla and this helped him escape. Godzilla ended up in the New York sewers, where a sewer rat attacked him, thus triggering Godzilla to grow up to sewer rat size. So now he was bigger. And what turned out was that the atomic radiation inside Godzilla made the shrink gas unstable. So he was slowly growing back up. Godzilla killed the rat, and it's one of the best comic books I've ever read, Godzilla versus this rat. It's just great. It's so dramatic. It's got that authorial voice you expect from 70s and 80s Marvel, where it's like you can practically hear Stan Lee, losing his mind over what's being described to you. Face front, true believers, Godzilla has defeated the rat. It's astonishing. Godzilla then, he keeps growing up, and he ends up in a museum. And it's really funny because at this point, he's like 20 feet tall. So he's like an actual dinosaur size. The Fantastic Four confronts him, only for Reed Richards to realize, hey, first off, that's a radioactive dinosaur. Secondly, we can't beat it. Like, it doesn't seem to feel anything we do. Even Sue can't keep it contained, and Sue is our strongest member, although we're not going to admit that for another 10 years. So Reed decides to go get Dr. Doom's time machine, the one that they have, because he left it behind.
Not the time machine, the time platform. I remember
the time
this.
platform. Yes, it is a time platform.
It literally, if you've seen, like, I hate to say it, compare it to this, but if you've seen Rick and Morty where they open like the square portal on like the floor, that is what this is in comic form. Yeah. Sorry, please continue.
Well, I will also say, if we're talking about it, it's one of the things where this thing has been used for the Thing to send himself back in time and become Blackbeard.
Yeah.
In the Marvel Comics universe, Blackbeard was the Thing in a disguise, which was just him having a big beard on his rocky face. So already it's a bit of Marvel Universe lore here. They use the time platform to send Godzilla back in time. They don't get him to anywhere near actual dinosaur time. They send him back to unconfirmed time period.
It was a different Earth.
Was there.
No,
yeah, it's a different Earth.
Yeah, it's Earth 78 411, which is where Devil Dinosaur is from.
Yeah, that's the tie-in. They then have multiple adventures. There's at least 3 issues where Godzilla and Devil Dinosaur
and Moonboy, don't forget Moonboy,
and Moonboy team up. Although honestly, the team up is Godzilla and Devil Dinosaur. Moonboy is just there. Like he usually is. In the stories, Moonboy didn't do a lot. He was usually just going, "No, Devil!" Devil Dinosaur and Godzilla, of course, fight because of course they're gonna fight. It's a comic book, guys. But then they team up and they fight a bunch of like ruthless. I want to say Neanderthals. I'm not sure if they were meant to be Neanderthals or just brute men or something. But they look like
they look like the stereotypical like cavemen of like media at the time.
Yeah, and they had a bunch of dinosaur slaves, and they sent them at Devil Dinosaur, and Devil Dinosaur would have been defeated, except Godzilla stepped in and was like, "No, I may not like him, but we fought, so we kind of have a bro thing now, where I'm not letting you hurt him or his tiny little friend." During this fighting, again, Godzilla begins to grow again, because whenever he gets really mad, his atomic energy comes up, and it disrupts the shrinking thing.
Which is not necessarily atomic energy nowadays. I believe they've retconned it to be gamma radiation in Marvel, but
Yeah, but gamma radiation is still radiation. But regardless, what happens is, because the time platform sent him to another reality, and because he was inherently radioactive, the time platform borks out, and Godzilla snaps back to Marvel Universe at his full size. So now he's not just a 20-foot tall dinosaur sized thing. Now he's literally skyscraper big. And this leads to the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, and Spider-Man all trying to fight Godzilla in New York. And it is 2 issues of the craziest, like Thor hitting Godzilla with his hammer, and Godzilla basically no-sells it. He's like, ow. And then just kicks Thor across the horizon.
and
Finally, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and the thing that ends this rampage, is it a superhero team up? Is it the power cosmic? Is it getting all of the Infinity Stones into one place? No, it's the young boy Robert crying to Godzilla to stop his rampage and return home, because it's still a Godzilla story in the Marvel universe.
Yeah, and it works. He successfully talks Godzilla down, and Godzilla's like, "This is not worth my time," and that guy with the hammer keeps hurting me, so he leaves.
But here's the thing about it, right? Like, so we're not just talking about it for the sake of talking about Godzilla, although we could. This tie-in is very important, because it starts the relationship between Godzilla and comic books, right? So that weird bonkers storytelling, it was sort of indicative of the time. Like, the 70s were just full of comics that did weird stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But having Godzilla, which was a movie monster that, lived outside of the realm of comics, brought in and essentially canonized, was extremely well, because even nowadays, while they'll do crossovers, like Godzilla's done crossovers with DC, Godzilla's done crossovers with the Ninja Turtles, Godzilla's done crossovers with the Power Rangers, which I could do a whole episode on that.
Quite frankly, it had to happen.
It had to. With that one, if anybody's interested in that story, let us know, and I will talk about an hour about how Godzilla and Power Rangers is a match made in heaven. But really, it was the first establishment of, here's an outside entity being brought into the Marvel universe, and then continuing to pay dividends in storytelling for years to come, because Godzilla would reappear multiple times after this. And it wasn't just this one comic run of Godzilla, because it was the Godzilla title, mind you. And it wasn't just, he faced off against these heroes, or, he comes back and he sides with the heroes, or, he comes back and he faces off against Dr. Doom, or Dr. Monstro, or any of these other folks. Instead, it established him as sort of like a reoccurring plot device. So then, when it came time in I believe it was the 80s at this point, when he did come back again, and it was with the X-Men. It might have been early 90s. I can't remember off the top of my head. But like tying it in with the whole mutation thing, tying it in with, he's a mutated natural creature that is now immortal, essentially. And then tying it in with gamma radiation, and tying it into that whole ethos. Because that was also a really big thing too. Like, people don't realize, at one point in time, gamma radiation was just like a weird catch-all term for like the oddities that they couldn't explain with like anything other than super science. Like, the cosmic radiation from the Fantastic Four was originally gamma radiation. Hulk was gamma radiation. There's a bunch of others that were affected by gamma radiation, including some mutants when they introduced the X-Men, that were caused by a mutation that was latent that got activated by gamma radiation. I think at one point they tried to like put the radiation that was infecting Spider-Man from the original spider bite as being gamma radiation, and that might have been the original like therapy stuff. But when they really started fleshing it out and defining what it was, Godzilla was one of the first things they used to try to define it. And
Yeah, and also I do want to point out while we're talking about this, Godzilla became something that recurred even when he wasn't there.
they
Like,
talked about it. He
yeah,
was
talked about
present.
it.
The destruction was present. They
The
reacted
big
to it.
robot, the big robot from the early Godzilla stories, showed up in an Avengers run, and they had to stop it. And the researchers that worked for Shield to make the helicarrier that they used to chase Godzilla later come back making the newest helicarrier. In fact, there's a She-Hulk story to tie it back to what you was talking about. There's a She-Hulk story where She-Hulk gets exposed to radiation, gamma radiation, inside his Shield helicarrier, and as a result, at the end, she can't turn back. And it's because the helicarrier is using the new power system that they used when they were chasing Godzilla. And it's the tie-in. They don't even mention Godzilla in the story, but if you know that the Godzilla comic happened, you understand why suddenly helicarriers had gamma radiation involved, because they were using gamma radiation to hunt Godzilla. There's a whole bunch of this stuff before they even had Godzilla come back. So yeah, it is wild how much of a story impact Godzilla had on the Marvel Universe years after they weren't publishing the comic anymore.
Yeah, and it's not just Godzilla, right? So one of the reasons we can talk about product tie-ins and crossovers in storytelling for Marvel is because they often are or in comics or just in general, a lot of times they are weird product placements, but every now and then they lead to some really interesting punctuation of what the universe means and the storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
One of the ones that I think is actually recently relevant, if you've been watching the Invincible series on Amazon, or if you've read the comics, you'll know that there was a crossover tie-in between Invincible and Spider-Man. And that I think it's Arachniman or whatever in Invincible's universe is that universe's Spider-Man. And there is actually, like, they exist in the same multiverse. It's not just this singular thing. And by doing that, and there are other examples of this beforehand where like DC and Marvel are connected through, we can talk about the Amalgam universe and that crossover and stuff like
Cosmic
that.
Brothers.
And how that sort of changed the landscape of comics as well. But like it then started opening up this thing that like, yes, the universe is infinitely large. It's not just Marvel that it connects to. It connects to all these other things potentially. We talked before the show about some of my favorite stuff with like the original Transformers. While they were a Marvel property, and don't forget the Transformers were essentially a toy to life thing before toy to life was ever existed. It was a toy line that they brought over that, you know, they went to Marvel and said, make us a comic, give us backstory, and had nothing to do with the TV show, right? That was done by completely separate entities, completely different, backgrounds for these characters, completely different identities. Some were adopted, some were collapsed in later, but they wouldn't have gotten the personalities they did. They wouldn't have gotten some of the defining features if essentially, I think it was Hasbro at the time, didn't go to Marvel and say, we want to do this together, right? And then Transformers became canon for a while. And a lot of the other, like the G.I. Joe comics, people don't realize that those were Marvel back in the day too. And that was a thing that existed. You had events where like G.I. Joe met the Avengers, or G.I. Joe got called in to deal with a mutant menace, or G.I. Joe had to go deal with, Doctor Doom's ground forces and this weird like offshoot Latverian like outpost in the middle of nowhere.
There's actually like a story where Spider-Man teams up with both G.I. Joe and then later with Transformers.
Yeah.
And it's a really actually pretty interesting story. I want to mention, since we're talking about this, since we talked about Marvel UK before, one of the people who was really big at the Transformers comic, both in the UK and in the North America, is a writer named Simon Furman. And Simon, a lot of the stuff that stuck from the comics comes from Simon. He wrote a ton of these books, and he basically, one of the things that Marvel seemed to do more than other companies did at the time, and I think that it's kind of reshaped the way these things work, is he respected Transformers as its own idea and gave it the same weight he would give any other characters appearing in the comic book that they weren't originally part of. So when Transformers showed up in the Marvel Universe, it was a 6-issue limited series initially. And in that 6-issue limited series, there was a mutant character who could control machines.
And like Cable.
She was a straight up mutant. I think she was like called the Gadget Blaster or something. She still exists as a character in Transformers to this day.
Yeah, she does.
She's still around.
And she was a template for other later editions. Like we're mentioning Cable, but it wasn't just Cable. What was was it Bastion? I think. Yeah, Bastion.
Bastion,
One of the other main villains who his mutation is her.
Mutation is he's a mutant machine. He's a sentinel that had mutated and come back from the future. But he has the same basic abilities to control machines. There's actually a big deal with the X-Men and all these different tie-ins, which we could talk about in a second. I definitely think we should talk about the Star Trek tie-ins that they did.
Well, there's one other one that I do want to mention real quick that I think a lot of people forgot about because it involved Axe body spray. That is sort of like this weird thing.
I wanted to forget it.
Yeah, most people want to forget it, but it's the reason that I'm bringing it up is because it represents something that we haven't seen since the early 90s, which this was the late 90s, early 2000s when they did this, I believe. And they called them the Freshmen because of course they did. But they were essentially another attempt at essentially breeding new heroes. And in this case, they were targeting Gen Z. But really, it's the last time we saw them do something like this was when they introduced the New Mutants or the Young Avengers, right? We hadn't seen a young group of new heroes being brought together and being tied directly with the Avengers. And while
I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to stop you and say the New Warriors, man.
New Warriors,
don't
excuse me.
New Warriors out.
Sorry. I apologize. New Warriors as well, because they were the 90s. I'm sorry. This is as recent as 2019.
The Axe thing was fairly recent. I'm looking at it right now.
But it's the first time that they're attempting in a very long time to essentially create new heroes spawned while, yes, it's a product tie-in, but it's interesting nonetheless, because when is the last time we've seen a truly fresh hero introduced into a comic, successfully or unsuccessfully, in years that isn't just a retread of one of the other heroes that already exists? Miles Morales was still thought of as a replacement Spider-Man, and has just recently started becoming really his own identity. It's really, really rare. And so again, highlighting that these tie-ins and crossovers, while people tend to look down their nose at them a lot of the times or write them off, sometimes are what you need, that motivation to kind of maybe get the creative juices flowing. And I know this sounds weird.
It's also a safe comic, and you it won't get canceled immediately. It's been commissioned for a certain amount of issues. You'll have those many issues. Go ahead.
I was going to say, something we talk about in the main show a lot is AAA studios, when they do game development, want to play it safe, right? They want to have that sort of guaranteed, we know this is going to sell, this is going to work out, we don't have to worry about it.
There's a reason Wolverine is on so many comics.
There's a reason there are so many titles under Spider-Man. There's a reason there's so many Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman comics. Comics are very much the same thing. They're periodicals that they need to sell a certain amount of numbers in order to maintain. And so it's very rare that they get the opportunity to sort of stretch their legs and try something new. And while it may not be the cleanest thing, like in this case, being partnered with Axe body spray, and then being forced to make new heroes there, it's still an opportunity to make something new. And whether or not that works out is a whole other story.
I'm going to use this as a springboard here to talk a little bit about Bill Mantlo. I recommend anybody who wants to check out who Bill Mantlo was to look him up. Writer, really a genius. In his way, he was almost the Grant Morrison of his time, but he suffered a debilitating head injury while he was going back to school to get a law degree. And as a result, his career, both as a writer and anything else, basically got truncated. But for a while in the 80s and 90s, Bill Mantlo was your go-to guy for wacky concepts that nobody thought would last, and then ended up lasting. One example is that Bill Mantlo is the creator of Rocket Raccoon, which he did in a Hulk run. It was actually a Hulk story where the Hulk goes to the world of Rocket Raccoon, and everything is basically a reference to a Beatles song.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all basically based in this weird mental asylum created to house the last humans from this colony world who were they were basically going through senile dementia. So the computers there built sapient animals to take care of them. Rocket's had a lot of different origins since then. This was just the first one. But Bill Mantlo created that. Bill Mantlo did a Hulk run where Hulk and Banner, essentially Banner was destroyed inside the Hulk, and it was just the Hulk in there. And as a result, he got banished to the nexus of infinite universes, because otherwise he would just keep rampaging on the Earth and they couldn't stop him. So that was, and it's trippy. If you read this story, it's trippy as heck. There's lots of wild stuff in it. But Mantlo is very important when talking about these kind of tie-ins, because he wrote 2 of them, and both of them outlasted the thing he was tying into. If you've heard of Micronauts today, Micronauts has been published by multiple companies now. There's been an Image Comics Micronauts. I think IDW did a Micronauts. The initial Micronauts comic was Bill Mantlo. And when Micronauts the toy, which is at the time it was a bunch of small toys where you could take the arms and legs off because they had little magnets, and you would just plop different heads on different bodies and mix and match, do whatever you wanted. When Mantlo got his hands on it, he created an actual backstory because the comics just had little things on the back of a card explaining who they were. Mantlo took that, ran with it, and created a whole continuity for it. And that continuity still exists because Marvel still uses the microverse that he invented for Micronauts. It's still there. It's one of the places Ant-Man goes when he shrinks enough. It's essentially what the quantum realm is in the movies. That's Bill Mantlo's microverse. It's the exact same thing. It's just a slightly different name. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, there's not. I don't want to completely veer off, but there's a couple other things I want to mention real quick, as far as interesting crossovers,
Okay.
or things that led to very interesting writing. And I want to go into another direction that Matt will kind of know this. Some of you may not know, and maybe some of you do. But do you do you know about Archie Comics? Do you understand that Archie Comics has some of the weirdest and most fascinating crossovers in comic history? And they've led to some very, very important things. The first one I'm going to call out is the Archie X Sabrina comics. Sabrina the Teenage Witch and Archie. And you think, oh, it'll be funny and kooky. No. They kickstart the zombie apocalypse, because it literally is Jughead's dog, Hot Dog, gets run over. Sadly, I apologize for anybody out there. And they go to Sabrina to resurrect Hot Dog. And so she does, and it kickstarts the zombie. They pet cemetery this, but it kickstarts the zombie apocalypse, which then also ties into the Scooby-Doo stuff and the post-apocalyptic Scooby-Doo stuff. But why this is important is because while this started as a goofy crossover, without this, 2 things wouldn't have happened. One, the Chilling Tales of Sabrina never would have been made. A TV show that was a much darker take on Sabrina, much more adult and contemporary view of it, that I think a lot of people really enjoyed. And 2, you wouldn't have gotten the Bayside TV show that I know a lot of people really enjoyed as well, because it was a much more adult take on Archie Comics. And it's not the only things that they did crossovers with either. Did you know that Betty and Veronica fought the Predator? It was interesting because it was one of those weird things where you wouldn't have expected it, but they're not these vapid, suburban girls. They're clever and resourceful and doing what they can to survive. And it was one of the weirdest crossovers, but led to some very interesting sort of interaction between the ultimate Predator, the killer of things, the hunter of things, and two teen girls from the suburbs, which then led them to start taking other looks at Predator movies and what the Predator actually interacted with, because it was so well received. And also, and Matt can probably maybe talk a little bit about this one, the Punisher showed up in Archie comics as well.
That one was great because it was basically a straight up Punisher story. Just the Archie characters standing around going, I don't understand what's happening. Why does this man want to kill Archie?
Mm-hmm.
And he wants to kill Archie because there's a drug dealing murderer who looks exactly like Archie. And then you get to see a guy who looks just like Archie. He doesn't swear because it's published by both companies. Archie doesn't do that, but he's still, spitting out threats and shooting people with Archie's face. It's even drawn in the original style of Archie comics. It's not drawn in like any kind of new style. It's straight up looks like an Archie comic. Much as some of the Predator stuff we did too, because it had covers that were that. But this is the whole story. Everyone looks like an Archie character except the Punisher when he shows up.
Yep.
In a weird sort of way, that's actually makes me want to get back to Mantlo though, because Mantlo, as he did Micronauts, he interspersed them throughout Marvel. The characters met. The villain Baron Karza showed up again multiple times. But as a result of this, a company, British company, comes to Marvel and says, we've got this new toy called ROM. And it's this toy with all these things. We don't really have much of an origin for it, but we'd like you to do a tie-in comic for it. ROM, the toy, barely lasted a year before it went out of business. Like it's owned today by Parker Brothers, I believe.
I think so.
Which might be owned by Hasbro.
I believe it is.
Yeah. So in this case, Hasbro now owns it. At one point, they've tried to do other comics where they tied ROM in with the Transformers. I don't know how well that went, but oddly enough, it would have worked because Marvel had already done it. The ROM comic lasted 100-something issues, which is amazing for a comic featuring a toy that no one had heard of or bought. And in the time that the ROM comic came out, he met the X-Men. They created an X-Men villain named Hybrid, who is a dire wraith human hybrid, and the human part of him was a mutant. So he had enormous mutant powers and also all the powers of dire wraith. The dire wraiths themselves were made part of Marvel continuity, which they still are. Mm-hmm. They're an offshoot of the Skrulls.
Yep.
And that's their origin. That's who they are. That's where they come from. They're essentially the current Marvel Skrulls are considered the deviants of their race. Just like on Earth, we have Eternals, deviants, and humans, and then humans have mutants that are an offshoot that uses the same genetic complex as the previous two. Also in humans, but I'm not getting into that. In the Dire Wraith origin, the original Dire Wraiths were overthrown by their deviants, and then the deviants learned sorcery and took over the whole kit and caboodle. So they're Skrull deviants. They're the offshoot of the Skrulls that went off and became their own. They have a version of Skrull shapeshifting, but it basically involves killing the person that they're shapeshifting into, which, Skrulls sometimes do that, but they don't have to do that. They kept around for a long time. They were still popping up in like the 90s and aughts. In addition to that, Rom met and eventually fell in love with Brandy Clark, who then was a main character in the Rom stories, but she then went off and met Rick Jones after Rom left, and she was dating him for a while. Rick Jones being the Hulk's friend, which meant that there's whole storylines where like the Dire Wraiths come and fight the Hulk because Rom isn't here. Spider-Man met him. Again, Spider-Man meets everybody. Now, if you're gonna have Spider-Man, if you're gonna have a character, you're gonna want to give him a little bit of bump of sales. You're gonna put Spider-Man in the book at some point. But all of that stuff aside, the reason it's interesting is because Mantlo integrated him so much into Marvel that even when Marvel lost the rights, there was too much. Like Galactus met Rom. Yeah. Rom became a herald of Galactus at one point and led Galactus to the Dire Wraith home planet so he could eat it. And he did, and it made him sick. He threw up the planet of the Dire Wraiths because they were just so nasty. But that's a story that's still continued past the point where Mantlo was writing it.
Not only
it's go ahead.
I was gonna say one other thing to recently, and I think it was 23. I'd have to check, but they're also Agent Venom, which was when Flash Thompson was bonded with the Venom symbiote, actually became Venom Space Knight, which was a ROM thing. Like the what is it? The Galadorian Space Knights accepted him essentially as one of their number. The legacy of this weird tie-in continues to this day. Like, I believe there are omnibuses currently being printed as we speak for ROM under Marvel's imprint, because Marvel just got the rights back, which means that now, like, Marvel could start producing this again at any point in time. But like, it left a lasting impression on the storytelling and shaped the universe of the Marvel that we know now. Like,
the Galadorians are still out there. Space Knights are still a thing in Marvel. When they did the Annihilation story back, I want to say in 2006, but I'm not sure exactly when.
Yeah.
Right around the time they did Civil War, they did an Annihilation storyline using all the cosmic heroes and villains and basically showing why some characters were too busy to deal with Earth. These Galadorians were amongst the fray, as it were. And it's also like, I want to talk really briefly about two others before we get to the one I think Joe has been waiting the longest to talk about.
I'm very eager for this one.
But there was a Superman Tarzan crossover where the premise of the book was, what if Superman's rocket had landed in Africa, and as a result of that, the Greystoke family were like, we're not gonna do that. They got taken back onto the boat by the pirates because they all saw the spaceship crash and were like, oh, God's mad, take them back on the ship. And they took them back to England, so Tarzan grew up as just Lord Greystoke. Meanwhile, Kal-El's living in the jungle, having much less of a trouble with Kerchak and Tublat. Those apes were not really that much of a problem for a Kryptonian who lives in the forest. And eventually the two of them team up to put things right. And it's really funny how essentially the point is made repeatedly through the storyline that Tarzan and Superman have basically the same origin. Their child of a different society is found in this other society and raised by the beings who live there. Tarzan in his main stories has a similar origin story to Superman, and that's kind of what they're dealing with. And it's funny because they did an Elseworlds in DC a little bit before this, where he becomes Mowgli. Like, it's an Elseworlds book, but where he is basically raised by the wolf pack that raised Mowgli. And Shere Khan tries to kill him, and he kills Shere Khan and wears him as a hat. And it's like, this is something that's become part of the Superman story mythos. It's like every so often someone comes along and shows a story of Superman behaving like Tarzan because it's a thing. Like they effectively have said, yeah, he is kind of like Tarzan. They have a similar origin. So that's just what I find amusing, because it's become part of the character, even when the other characters are no longer, it's not canon or anything, but it's canon for Superman that he does have this bestial aspect to him, that he is essentially being raised by primitives. And he is, in fact, like a foundling raised by beings who are not like him. It's kind of hilarious to me, and it comes up more often than you'd. So I just wanted to put that one out there. I'm going to give this to Joe now because I'm curious to see if I guess right.
Well, it's sort of the season, so I kind of want to talk about the one and only. I shouldn't say one and only, because they did this multiple times. The number of times that Santa Claus has shown up in Marvel Comics.
Actually, you know what? I'm not going to stop you, but we have to tie into the fact that he also does this in DC Comics with great frequency.
He does.
And much the same way. But you go first, and then I'll tie in what I'm talking about.
He does, but I think the interesting thing for me is the integration that Marvel has with it, because there's a couple different angles. One of the things that I think is in every comic, everything does this, where Santa shows up, Santa saves the day. You've seen it in every TV show you've ever watched, every sitcom, every 90s TV show. Like, they've all had a Santa Claus episode. As a matter of fact, like, I forget, what is it? The TV show Grimm, like with all the
The folklore
the
monsters,
folklore
the Grimm's
monsters,
fairy tales.
the Grimm's fairy tale
It's
stuff.
actually
Like Santa Claus is a Grimm, he's a Warren or whatever they call a blue button or something like that. He's a werewolf, essentially, an immortal werewolf, because that's a thing that happens. In the comics, he's shown up a couple different times as a couple different ways. I will say that my favorite is probably the fact that at one point in time he actually fought Thanos. Why did he fight Thanos? Because Thanos was a naughty boy. He literally took the Infinity Gauntlet and all of the Infinity Stones from Thanos, banished the Thanos copter, and then went on to use the Infinity Gauntlet to deliver all the presents to all the boys and girls of the universe. In some cases, it is shown in the comics that he is actually one of the faces of Odin, which is not uncommon. That's a fairly common
that's a type that comes up. Yeah.
And the thing that comes up, and it comes up in other media too, like if you've ever read Jim Butcher's The Dresden Files, that is one of the things that shows up there as well, where Odin may actually, in fact, be Santa Claus or is Santa Claus. I can't remember. It's been a while since I read the book. Sorry, Jim. Or the one where he interacts with the X-Men, where, in fact, Santa is the only ultra, like, Omega level mutant ever registered to Cerebro. And this is I believe he was the first ever classified as an Omega mutant in the comics, a concept that has since been expanded, but would not have existed if they did not give this to Santa Claus in a comic appearance. He helped redefine that entire like concept because when they wrote him and they made him this super powerful mutant, they started thinking, well, what about other Omega mutants? What about the other ones that are at this potential level? What can we do to expand this idea? It's just really fascinating to me because
I'm sorry, I can't let this continue until you talk about Santa Doom.
Go ahead.
You remember Santa Doom?
You mean the one? Which one? The one where Doom
took over the North Pole.
Yep.
Only to be basically talked down by Santa Claus, who doesn't even fight him.
Nope.
He doesn't bother. He's not even mad at him. He's just disappointed because Victor had so much potential. And it's great because Doom shows up literally in a Santa costume with the beard over his mask and starts going, "All will fear Santa, Doom." And this is established to have happened.
It is also established that at one point in time, after the death of Doctor Strange, Doom once considered giving the mantle of Sorcerer Supreme to Santa Claus.
Yeah, because he'd be good at he would do the position proud. It's just that he doesn't have time.
Yes,
He's too busy.
That's literally it. That is literally so. Again, and this is probably not the one Matt thought I was going to talk about. I don't know if this was or wasn't, but
it wasn't. But I wasn't surprised either.
It's fascinating to me because again, it's a weird crossover that shouldn't work, but did and has multiple times and has had ripples across multiple stories and timelines. I mean, Santa has interacted with Spider-Man, She-Hulk, Doc Octopus, Howard the Duck. This one I think is absolutely hilarious because nobody remembers this one. Do you remember the Great Lakes Avengers? I remember the Great Lakes Avengers.
Yeah. They went from the Great Lakes Avengers to becoming like one of the
Generation X.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. They were also one of the teams created after Civil War, like the Initiative, I think it was called.
Oh yeah,
each state had its own superhero team. They had Mr. Immortal, who has the most terrifyingly pointless immortality power in existence. It's horrifying, but yeah, no, I remember them.
Or the time that he fought Hitler in World War II, and then fought Hitler later on in New York City, the clone of Hitler called Hate Monger.
And it should also be pointed out that all this stuff inspired Grant Morrison to do his own Santa Claus comic, where it's just Claus and he's basically like this. He's still Santa in all the ways you understand him, but he looks like a comic book character. So he's like ripped and muscular and stuff. But when I mentioned DC did the same thing, a list of some of the things the DC Comics Santa Claus has done. He every year goes to Apocalypse and leaves coal for Darkseid.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what Darkseid does to stop it from happening, what traps he puts up, what forces he marshals, whatever he does, it doesn't matter. Santa always gets in, always leaves the coal in his chair. And
It's
if
like
you know anything about Darkseid, you know he doesn't like people messing with his chair.
it's like that. It's like that one random guy in Marvel Comics that Thanos messes with every year on his birthday for no reason. It just happens. But yeah.
Yeah. In this case, Santa does it because Darkseid is, of course, naughty. But also, there's a more recent comic with Batman where Superman finds out that Batman has known Santa Claus for years.
Yeah, literally years.
Yeah, just they hang out, they're pals. And he's like, "You know Santa Claus?" And I think part of the reason why that was such a big deal was because it's also canonical that Superman still believes in Santa Claus.
Yep.
Like even in the cartoon, they have a scene where Superman's parents are like, "Yes, we had to wrap all the presents with lead foil so he wouldn't see them before he was ready to get them." And he goes, "You mean Santa wrapped them?" And they go, "Yes, we met Santa." And John Johns is standing there going, "Who is this Santa?" So yeah, Santa Claus is actually possibly one of the most prolific comic book tie-in characters, and almost always has a permanent effect on the story. Like if it's not up there with getting having the Sorcerer Supreme mantle offered to him, it's stuff like the fact that Superman refuses to not believe in him, or that Batman actually hangs out with the guy. So yeah, Santa is actually right up there.
What was the one that you thought I was going to bring up?
I thought you want to talk more about Transformers.
No, because
you did it earlier and for good reason. But once you did that, I'm like, wait, what's he going to do? It's not Transformers. What is he going to do?
At one point in time, I do want to do an episode about Transformers, and not for the reason that you guys think of me just being obsessed with it. That's true.
It's got multiple continuities to talk about, though,
including the current comic run, which is a phenomenal deep dive into the actual ethos of the Transformers universe. And like, it's one of those things where like, it is a transformative media to tell stories through the lens of these are just robotic aliens that can transform into, vehicles. But and
when talking about them, if you're talking about the lore of Transformers and not just, if you don't just do the comics, if you talk about the other media, the Bay movies actually have a really weird but interesting lore behind them.
I'm going to say something that might be controversial for some folks. I don't like Michael Bay, but I like the Michael Bay Transformers movies.
I feel like it's sort of the level of his storytelling craft.
I think it's because he had a good editor during them and actually made them made sense.
I mean, the guy's got a Criterion disc on because he does have skills at visual storytelling. It's just that he doesn't have a lot of discipline on it, I would say. Like Michael Bay does not stop himself when he gets the impulse to do something ridiculous that involves a lot of explosions. He just does.
Lens flare, explosion. Yeah, anyway.
Also, we got to throw in Transformers 1.
Yeah, like again, it's a deep look at old lore redefined.
And some really good, quite frankly, some really good job of showing characterization and growth on those characters.
Oh yeah.
Where when Transformers 1 starts, Optimus Prime isn't Optimus Prime, he's Orion Pax. He's not a good person.
But again, and to tie this back, this is all because way back when these very inhuman characters were
given to a comic book company to write about them.
We're not only given to a comic book company to write about them, we're given to a comic book company to write about them and forcing them to interact with their established characters, their mainline characters who had personalities. And so you can't just have, and like, this is the thing, like at that time, you didn't have background characters. Not really. If you were on a panel of a comic book, you had to be interesting. And so it forced them to develop further personality and character growth that then carried over and is now being reciprocated and multiplied in current media for these characters. Like that's really what I want to get to as sort of like the ending thought. And we've talked about this a lot. Crossovers are sometimes goofy and fun and sometimes make no sense. I'm looking at you, Combo Man. Some of them never should have ever existed. Looking at you, NFL Man.
Oh no, NFL Super Pro wasn't that bad.
It was pretty bad.
I can't even make myself.
Yeah, the worst retooling of an Nihilus toy mold ever. But like it sometimes leads to innovation and evolution of characters that may have otherwise become stale, right? Like the idea of the current, like, and I'll say this right now, DC Comics did a crossover recently with, again, Justice League versus Godzilla. And I will say this, and I will probably get some flack for it, but over the course of the last several, years, Justice League has gotten a little stale. It's sort of the same type of story in and out, and hadn't really had anything, mixing it up. Even like the universe shattering catastrophes were sort of something we've already seen before. And while we had seen Godzilla before, seeing Godzilla fight Superman to a standstill is still an awe-inspiring moment. The last time you saw something like that truly happen in a comic book was Doomsday, and that was a big to-do. But then it forced them to take a look at the characters and then start doing other stuff. I maintain that had Godzilla versus Justice League never published, you never would have gotten the absolute DC series, which is dark and gritty and a different take on all of the characters, literally all of the characters in the DC universe through the lens of a universe created by Darkseid, and what that looks like, what these characters look like. And it makes like this new, compelling, interesting story. Like, I'll say, I love Wonder Woman as a character. Absolute Wonder Woman is probably my favorite incarnation of her that's ever existed. And I think if we had not gotten sort of this, like, yeah, people have an appetite for maybe a little bit of a darker, bloodier, or more brutal comic, it never would have been done. Because again, DC and Warner Brothers, or at least at the time it was DC Warner Brothers, they would only play it safe. It was, unless you could prove to them that this would work, that this would sell, they wouldn't take the risk. And because they took an educated gamble on Godzilla, because the Godzilla movies were present at the time, it showed them data that people would consume it, and it let them be adventurous in a way that their comics had stagnated before that. So it opens up this world of interesting storytelling, potentially. It doesn't always work, but when it does, it's like magic, or at least to me it is. And I heard you talk, so go ahead, Matt.
No, I'm just saying, like, one of the things about DC's current direction is partially fueled by corporate instability.
Yep.
Which, we could talk about, like, is another thing that affects storytelling in various media. But it's also fueled to a certain degree by the fact that people want to see, like, Absolute Batman is the Batman take where someone's like, what if somebody actually did decide to just kill these villains? Why would it be a bad idea? What would happen? Mm-hmm. In a weird sort of way, the Absolute Batman storyline is all about a guy who thought he knew what he was doing, but as of right now has realized I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah.
And the Absolute Superman is, in a way, it's a go back to the golden age. One of the things about Superman is this is a character who I love personally. I love Superman. If we ever did a Superman episode, I could talk all day. But a lot of times people won't accept any other version of Superman than the Silver Age Christopher Reeve version. Yeah, the Boy Scout. And the thing is that the new Superman movie did okay. It didn't do what they seem to think it was gonna do. And quite frankly, and I'm not saying this to be mean, I don't know what they told David Corenswet to do, but sometimes he seems completely lost.
But at the same time, that also opened up doors, because then when you start going into the Peacemaker series, which we could talk about the last season of that then,
I think that James Gunn's great for stories like Peacemaker.
But it intersected with the Superman movie story in a way that started changing the context of it.
I agree that, but one of the things my biggest problem with it is that it is a reversion to the Silver Age deal. And
we can talk about that later. That's a whole episode.
But I would love to see a story where they took risks with Superman the way they do in Absolute Superman.
Yeah.
Where he is still absolutely caring and wants to help people. That should always be there. That should never leave the character. But how you help people can be explored. With a character like Superman, the conflict is never, it's not like a conflict with Batman or Wonder Woman or anybody else. The conflict is not with a threat to him. Mm-hmm. It's with how is he deal with threats to you
Yep.
because you're more important to him than he
It's
is. In a weird sort of way, for all the 90s weirdness, the Death of Superman comic, which changed comics, is an example of them taking a leap on that concept.
it,
Because
it
Superman will die for you.
and it's in that core concept too, because even the very first appearance of Superman, that very iconic Action Comics cover, he is saving somebody from being hit by a car by essentially crushing that car and the person inside of it over his head.
Yeah, he's smashing it right into the ground. There's a story where he breaks into the governor's mansion because someone's going to be executed unfairly. And he literally, they're like, let's see you get through this door. And he smashes the door and goes, it was your idea. He's got a not darker, but he is glib.
Yeah.
And he takes risks. Anything like that, whether it's Wonder Woman and Absolute Wonder Woman, which I agree is one of the best takes, it's like all the good ideas Brian Azzarello had without any of the bad ideas Brian Azzarello had.
And there were plenty of them.
Oh yeah, there were plenty of them. But we've been going on for a while, and if we don't stop soon, I'll just keep talking about Superman. So go ahead and say stuff. And
it's one of those things. Like, I just want to take the moment to encourage you to not shy away from those weird crossovers. Give them a shot, and maybe take a look at some of them, and maybe hopefully this discussion changed your evaluation of some of them and their importance to shaking up something that might have become stale, right? Like, again, Spider-Man as a comic book was stale until the multiverse happened, Spider-Geddon, and Spiderverse.
Oh
and
man,
all that.
we could talk about Spider-Man. To my mind, I one of these days I want to do a thing where we talk about various alignment characters from Dungeons and Dragons as these various comics and media characters. Spider-Man is my number one pick for lawful good.
Yeah, pretty much.
More than Batman, more than Superman, more than anybody. We're
going to talk about them at some point. Today is not that day, but again, we got to go. I just want to encourage you to take a chance, read that book, watch that TV show, watch that movie crossover, give it a shot. And if it's not for you, that's great, but maybe it might be, or maybe it will pay dividends later on down the road. You never know. And they're not always the bad thing that people seem to make them out to be. Sometimes they're exactly what you need to get something that you wanted and you didn't know you wanted later on down the road. But that's going to do it for us this week. Again, I do want to thank you for joining us and remind you that Blizzard Watch is made possible due to your generous contributions at patreon.com/BlizzardWatch. Your continued support means that this podcast site and community is able to thrive and grow. Blizzard Watch supporters enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to our podcast, a better chance at having your question answered on our podcast, or the Q&A ads-free site experience. If you have questions for this or any of our podcasts, do want to remind you, you can go ahead and send those in. Podcast@blizzardwatch.com is the email. We ask that you put the show that it is for in the subject line, and then any special pronunciation of your name in the body. If you don't want to send us an email, you can also head up on Discord. We have 2 channels set aside. We have the Q and Podcast Questions channel, which is open for everyone. Same rules apply as the email. However, if you are a Patreon subscriber, as an additional way of saying thank you for helping us keep the lights on, with the Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel set aside, we do look there first to find our questions or topics that we will be covering in future episodes. And I do want to remind you that we understand that it is the holiday season here at the time of this recording, and the world is not making it so easy to spend extra money. And if you can't support us on Patreon, we don't want you to feel bad about that. We do, however, want to encourage you to help us in other ways. Follow us on social media. We have them all listed on our website. You can go ahead and click the links there to follow us through. Share our content with friends that you think might enjoy what we talk about. You can also go ahead and send comments on the product on the podcast and give us likes, and all that stuff does help. The algorithm does not feed us to people if we are not getting that interaction. So if you can't give us monetary support, you can give us that support as well, and we would really appreciate it. But with that, folks, I do want to thank you very much for joining us. We will see you next time.